Okay, we're going to start an examination of the Church of Scientology. This is different from Christian Science. And so they are probably the most extreme in its development, and they are the most, their cult is the most that has declined since its founding. So let's get into this a little bit. I've given you expanded notes again. Okay, there we go. The symbol, the S, you see the S there? That stands for Scientology. And you see the two triangles there. The lower triangle is called the ARC triangle. It's just three letters, but each letter stands for something. This is on page 2 of your, well, I think I included it on your notes. If I did, it's on page 2. A stands for affinity. R stands for reality, and C for communication. Now, you begin to smell the stench of their psychology, a touch of new age stuff that is in here, a little bit of Eastern mysticism. They are a conglomerate of many different cults. So the A stands for affinity, the R stands for reality, and the C for communication. The first corner of the triangle is affinity, which is the degree of liking or affection for someone or something. Now, it's interesting, that's all they say. How do you measure that degree? R is the second corner, and is fundamentally agreement. Agreement. The third corner is communication, defined as the interchange of ideas between two people. And they say that all three are interrelated. Now, from a geometry point of view, that would be a true statement, but their reasoning doesn't make a lot of sense. Without a degree of liking or some basis of agreement, wait a minute, let me back up. The third corner is communication. Okay, all three of these are interrelated. Without a degree of liking or some basis of agreement, there is no communication. So in other words, you have to like something or there's no communication. Without communication, and see, this is a form of reasoning, cause and effect. Because of this, then this. Because of this, then this. Without communication and some basis for affinity, remember, that's I like something, or emotional response, there can be no reality. There can be no reality. So if I don't have an affinity for you, if I don't like you, then it's going to be hard to communicate and reach a agreement, and there really is no reality in the relationship. Now, without some basis for agreement and communication, they say, there can be no affinity. And when one corner of the triangle is improved, now watch this, the other two corners are likewise improved. And they don't say which corner of the triangle needs to improve. Now, these three independent factors combined add up to understanding and are expressed as a triangle. The ARC, that lower triangle, is a fundamental principle of Scientology religion. Now, the upper triangle is the KRC triangle. K is for knowledge, R, responsibility, C, control. Like the points of the ARC triangle, these three elements are interrelated. When one corner of the KRC triangle is raised, the other two also are raised. As a human spirit was truly in the realm of religion, a group of Los Angeles Scientologists formed the church in 1954, but we'll get back to that in a minute. I just, these cults have symbols, and there is a meaning behind the symbols. Out of all the cults that we have examined, this is the most complicated symbol, and the eclectic approach, eclectic meaning a combination of a lot of different things, really makes it hard to understand and grasp. What you will find is that the Scientology movement, even though it's on the decline, it's in the state of the fruit, flakes, and nuts. It's in California. And it really is appealing to young people who are in search for who they are. So let's go back and look at the founder here, okay? This is a picture of him in his younger days. He has a sordid background. He has a sordid background, and once I give you some of the highlights, I think you begin to realize how the sordidness of his life contributed to the development of the cult Scientology. Now, he was born in 1911, March 13th, in Tilden, Nebraska. Where, you ask, is Tilden, Nebraska? Well, it's in Nebraska. It's about 22 miles close to Norfolk, and the population as of this year is a whopping 900 people. So you can imagine when he was born, the population was probably not that much. He had 3 wives, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. 2 of them contributed to the development of Scientology. He died in January 24th in 1986. He had 7 children by these 3 wives. He studied engineering for 2 years at George Washington University. He has no degrees to his credit. None are listed on any biographical information about him. After 2 years, he decided to leave George Washington University in pursuit of trying to understand the meaning of life. Now, he was in the Naval Reserves during World War II, the Naval Reserve. So he was not active duty per se on a ship. Now, he later claimed, there is no record of this whatsoever except his self-reporting. He later claimed to have healed himself of several serious war-related ailments using the techniques he explained in his one book that was the basis for everything else in 1950, called Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. Now, right there should be a tip-off about where this man is going. But in a few minutes, I will show you the emptiness of this man's pursuit to try to understand mental health through the sciences. Now, he published his best-selling book by the same title, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. Dianetics at its core, let me read this slowly to you, and you have this in your notes, and you might underline some of these things. A self-help book that aimed to offer a sense of psychological enlightenment through a concept he called mental auditing. Now, Hubbard's stated goal was to analyze humankind's mental aberrations and to offer a means for overcoming them. He later adapted his theories into a religion known as the Church of Scientology. So if I were to summarize this, he wrote a self-help book. Now remember where we're at. We're in California here. And there was two brands of helping people. One was called Christian counseling. And back then that term was acceptable. Jay Adams used that term. That was the only term known back then to distinguish that the Christian counseling was coming from a Judeo-Christian point of view. The other one was secular counseling. This is where Hubbard is coming from. The self-help book was designed to provide a sense of psychological enlightenment, to understand why you do what you do, why you think what you think. And it was supposed to take place through a concept called mental auditing. I'm not quite sure what the procedure was. Unless I read the book, I would not know the mechanics of it, but it seems to me that there would be a step-by-step process whereby a person analyzed and evaluated his responses to his life. Now, he was interested, and here comes the psychology again, he was interested to understand man's mental aberrations. In other words, the distorted thinking, the strange thinking, the different thinking that a man had, to help them overcome the problems that they were facing. He later adapted his theories into a religion, as I mentioned, known as Church of Scientology. Now, you know the reason he did this primarily, I would offer to you, the reason that he did it is because he found no satisfaction in the pursuit of studying man's mind through the sciences. And so he began to explore a spiritual dynamic, but he wedded, W-E-D-D-E-D, or he wed, W-E-D, he married his psychological, scientific background and all of the empirical data that he had gathered with what spiritual principles that it gathered from a wide variety of sources. Now, in 1952, Hubbard introduced a new aspect of the auditing process. Now, remember the book came out in 50, so 2 years later, he comes up with a new auditing process. Why would I need to develop a new auditing process? Because the original process evidently was not working and was not bringing the results that he touted that it would bring. And what was this device called? Electropsychometer. That's a mouthful. Electro, which means electric. Psycho, meaning the mind. Meter, meaning measurement. So they abbreviated it to E-meter. And he claimed that this machine measures the strength of a small electrical current that runs through the body as an individual answers auditors' questions. Now, in modern day language, what machine do you think this might represent? A lie detector test, where you're hooked up. They're monitoring your pulse and your reaction. Your body is responding or reacting to the auditor's question. Is this a precursor to the lie detector machine? I don't know. But that was his intent, to measure the response of the human body to questions that were asked. And evidently, these questions then, if there was a strong negative response, would be explored further to find out the aberration in order to help that person overcome that situation. Now, the introduction of the E-meter helped mark Hubbard's transition from Dianetics to Scientology. And he coined the term. He coined the term from Latin and from Greek. Study, scio, and knowing, logos. So the Scientology, if you break it down to its root derivatives, means the science of knowledge, but it employed the principles of Dianetics in a different framework. The mannequin was stripped of Dianetics, and the mantle of religion, however he understood it, and we'll know more about that next week, was the new mantle that was put on the skeleton, on the mannequin. Rather than an approach to mental health as he thought his book was intended to do, his ideas would now become the basis for a new religious movement. So again, I believe the dissatisfaction with what he supposedly had discovered at a personal level, and I might throw in here perhaps maybe an emotional situation that he formulated his steps on how to relieve himself from these war-related ailments. There's no medical records of anything that he received treatment for. He found that it wasn't working for him anymore, or that others that had come to him were finding out that it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. So another spin had to be put on it. Now, the premise of Scientology is this. At the core of Scientology is a belief that each human has a reactive mind that responds to life's traumas, clouding the analytical mind and keeping us from experience reality. Now, for most of that statement, we would agree, except for the last premise of the situation. We have traumatic events in our lives. Our minds either react or respond to it. Reacting for the Christian would be sinful, right? Responding would be biblical. But he goes a step further and says that because our mind is reactive, our analytical aspect of our mind cannot work properly to help us know what is going on and experience reality. It is clouded. It is being interfered with. Now, as I pondered this, what came to my mind was a guy by the name of Abraham Maslow. He was a psychologist, and he lived between 1908 and 1970. So Hubbard could have been exposed to Maslow's approach, where he developed a pyramid called self-actualization. So he had this pyramid, and there were steps in order to reach self-actualization that you had to go through. And if you did not complete all of the steps, if you did not complete the first step, you couldn't move on to the second. So it was this idea of levels and contingency. And you hear this in the explanation of their symbol, ARC. If A is not working, then R and C is not going to be working. But if A is working, then R and C will work. Well, Maslow's hierarchy of needs was 5 levels, and then a protege came along and added 2 more levels to it. It's interesting that many people have studied this hierarchy of needs for self-actualization, and they concluded through investigation that few ever reached self-actualization. In fact, when Maslow was asked if he had reached self-actualization after all the years of working on this and teaching on that, he admitted that he had not. So here was a system that was developed that was supposed to do something, but it didn't. And I believe the reason is that the premise for its development was flawed. Now, he was an author, as I said. He wrote this book on Dianetics. He was an inventor of this E-meter that I mentioned to you. And we're going to take a look now at the historical development. The historical development. Now, with the publication of this book on May 9th, 1950, a national movement began. By summer, people who had read the book flocked to his home in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and they wanted to know more. They wanted to become more proficient in the Dianetics auditing. And with this demand, there were 4 individuals. Their names have not been listed. There was an attorney, a publisher, a doctor, and an engineer. And they approached Hubbard to form the Hubbard Dianetics Research Foundation. And with his consent, this foundation was formed in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Now, with his continuing research in mind, Hubbard, by the late 1951, found himself studying the human spirit to answer the question of who or what was operating the mind. So evidently, his procedures were not answering those questions. Now, with this basic and elementary discovery of the human spirit, a new subject was founded, and that was Scientology. Now, Scientology is an eclectic approach. Eclectic, think of eclectic like a restaurant that has a salad bar, or a restaurant that has a buffet. And they got fish there, they got burgers there, they got deer there, they got roast beef, they got turkey, they got all sorts of stuff that is there. That's the idea. You pick and choose what you want. And I believe this is what Hubbard did, because if you read the material carefully, he uses Eastern philosophy and mysticism mixed with Western thought, and he developed a religious structure. Now, he died in January 24th in 1986, so he had about perhaps 20 years exposure to Maslow, and I can see from my perspective that he incorporated some of Maslow's concepts of the hierarchy of needs and the pyramid that Maslow worked on. Now, Scientology is branded as the world's major religion, the youngest religion currently today. And according to their literature, Scientology is not what you believe, it is what you do. There is a Church of Scientology in Philadelphia. Scientology has its own television network. And if you were to go into a Church of Scientology, it's going to be set up like a very large building. There's going to be media displays. You can view certain segments on DVD. Quite an elaborate Best Buy TV audio store in there. They have an information desk as you walk in, and they'll answer any questions or direct you to a segment of the building where you can view their statement of faith or their belief system. And one of the things that they publicly say, and it's a part of their literature, that what is true to you is true. What is true to you is true. So what is that saying? Truth is relative. If you think it's true and it's going to bring you a reality in your life, then it's true. It might not be true for somebody else. So truth is subjective. Truth is subjective. And I would venture to say, although I have not queried this personally, I would venture to say they would believe all truth is truth. The religious people would say all truth is God's truth, but they don't believe in a God. That's a fundamental problem we'll talk about next week. All truth is not truth. You've heard me mention this before. You have empirical data that can be changed. The only truth that is all truth all the time in every situation for all people at any time is the Word of God. Now, their headquarters are in Los Angeles, California, and that's the largest concentration of Scientologists or Scientology-related organizations in the world, with the church's most visible presence being in the Hollywood district of the city. And we'll take a look at some very famous movie stars, actors, that are a part of Scientology and some who have deserted or left Scientology. Now, at one point, the membership peaked in the early 90s with roughly 100,000 members worldwide. But membership has recently dipped to 20,000. However, a Scientology spokesman vigorously denies this, claiming the church has millions of parishioners in 167 nations, a third of those who are in the United States. Now, I mentioned that he's got somewhat of a sordid background. Remember, he had 3 wives and 7 children. Now, in 1978, Hubbard was convicted of fraud after he was tried in absentia by France. In the same year, 11 high-ranking members of Scientology were indicted on 28 charges for their role in the church's Snow White program. That's what it was named. And it was a systematic program of espionage against the United States government. Isn't that interesting? Mary Sue, one of his wives, was convicted of conspiracy and spent 4 years in a federal prison. He had other legal issues as well. The Church of Scientology was under investigation for allegation of sexual child abuse. None of it was substantiated. Everybody was exonerated, and reports indicated that the detectives who were called about the allegations spoon-fed the children on what to say. But just the fact that such a reputation would be put out there puts bags under the eyes of Scientology. Sarah Elizabeth, and she's got a very long name here, Bruce Northup Hollister. Imagine that on her wedding certificate. Guess what? She was an occultist and a major contributor to the development of Dianetics. So here we have a self-proclaimed scientist who marries several women, one of them being an occultic person, and together they collaborate on the book of Dianetics and I'm sure other literature. They even have, when you walk into these churches, and they are quite the basilicas, quite the buildings, almost like you're walking into a Roman Catholic church, only not as Gothic, okay? They have people sitting at little computer screens, and you come in, and they will counsel you, and they'll use their Dianetic program to try to help you find what is blocking your mind so you can reach reality. Now, midway point here, let me go ahead and give you a summary here. Hubbard could not find answers through science for man's behavior. He integrated his knowledge of science with a distorted religious motif, a mixture of Eastern mysticism, Western thought, the occult, humanism, and psychology. So it should be no surprise to you when we get together next week and talk about their theology and their practices, that basically they have no Judeo-Christian theology. They don't even have a pagan theology in the sense of a God. Now, I'll tell you what, we are going to get into some very far out things when it comes down to what they advocate that took place about the human race. And so this will be an interesting study. All right, questions, thoughts from great readers?